I'm Jeff Blythe, the writer, producer, director of Portraits of Canada. When Walt Disney Productions made a 360-degree circle vision film for Montreal's Expo 67, the sponsor was Bell Canada. For Expo 86 in Vancouver, the sponsor had evolved into Telecom Canada. This first image represented the film's main theme. Take something well-known, like this group of 7 painting, and then reveal beyond what you might have expected. Canada, while familiar, is actually more than meets the eye. We had Disney artists extend the original image in the same artistic style, as if that one well-known panel had been part of a much larger work that had never been seen before.
They form portraits.
Of course, we needed the title in French as well.
It's 4:30 here on VOCM. Going to be overcast today. Thankfully, no rain in the forecast, and even the...
On our survey in Newfoundland, we happened to arrive at this little fishing village on the one day a year when the entire town gets together to launch all their boats. If we'd come one day later, we'd never have known about their tradition. We decided on the spot to come back exactly 1 year later. While the town welcomed our Disney crew, they weren't going to delay getting their crucial fishing boats in the water. We paid them to be extras, even though they were already doing it for free. The community is quite close-knit, and we used several members of one leading family as our central characters.
I think we're going to have a good season. I think we're going to have lots of fish this summer.
Everyone works hard here, but they play hard too. Émile Benoit, a famous folk musician, performed to a pre-recorded soundtrack along with 2 local artists. This kind of shot, an interior with a moving camera, required a lot of care with lighting and placement of the extras, with special attention to keeping everything in focus.
Across the country, an equally rugged, but more...
These cowboys really were branding cattle, so we had to be careful with how much or how little of the operation we actually showed. The smell was not great.
I got a bad one right now.
This was one of my favorite aerial shots because the lay of the land allowed us to reveal the stark edge of the city rising out of the prairie. These are the real pens where cowboys find out which bronc they've been assigned to ride. They know each horse by reputation, how they'll react, which way they'll turn.
Yeah, you know much about this horse?
We filmed this during the actual stampede, so our time in this back area was very limited.
He's old enough for about 3 jumps. He'll be okay.
Our cowboy made 2 attempts to get a decent ride. He fell off quite early the first time. On the second attempt, the sun came out in the middle of the shot, but the change in exposure was worth it. This shot is the only one in the film borrowed from O Canada. We staged our actors against the real chuck wagon races, timing our dialogue and our camera move. The noisy cameras prevented the actors from hearing each other, and voices were dubbed in later.
Some have chosen...
We visited the training camp of Rapattack, a unique firefighting unit in British Columbia. They're famous for their quick response in getting to fires. In order to film on the same level with their training platform, we needed to bring in a high lift.
Into fire someday, your life will depend on that thing.
The instructors and crew used this rig to practice a rapid descent out of a helicopter. This shot involved our own smoke and flames. The Rapattack crews were very accommodating and donated the helicopter time that we'd expected to pay for. In exchange, we arranged to give them free movie rentals for their entire camp. They let us use a section of forest to create a controlled burn. We used rubber cement as fuel, which could be painted directly onto the trees. I could be very specific about placement of the flames for our cameras. To help trigger the many points of fire, I joined the crew, wearing Rapattack gear in order to blend in while directing. Far above the Arctic Circle, it was sometimes very difficult to find places to hide our crew and equipment. For this one, they had to ride on dog sleds more than a mile to get out of the shot.
Their culture and native skills. And up here, it can mean the difference in survival.
While this scene involved real Inuit hunters speaking only in Inuktitut, I was hoping the meaning, that the snowmobile had broken down and that the man was being offered a lift, would be clear to all audiences without needing to add any subtitles. I was deliberately taking a not-so-subtle poke at the reliability of dog teams compared to snowmobiles. If you get trapped in a blizzard, a snowmobile won't keep you warm. There was no trickery involved here. The dog team really was capable of pulling the sled with the snowmobile as cargo. This was the biggest igloo the town had ever built, 22 feet wide. These structures are fragile until they're completed. Too much sunlight collapsed ours before it was finished. Our film crew was scheduled to leave the next morning on a once-a-week flight. However, at that time of year, it was light for nearly 23 hours, so the Inuit rallied and wouldn't give up. There was still time, they said. The workers started the building process all over again, and we were able to film the completed igloo with a traditional drum dance in the middle of the night. Our crew was exhausted, but we made our flight out. Next up was the National Ballet of Canada, where one challenge was filming in the practice rooms, where all 4 walls had full-length mirrors. I was the only one of the crew in the room for filming and had to stand very still on top of the cameras. If I moved at all, I was in the shot. For this very low angle, we turned the camera upside down.
Soft plie, gently, and lift.
We filmed our key moment during a real performance of La Sylphide on stage in front of a live audience. We were allowed a very limited time between Act 1 and Act 2 and had to roll our cameras into position during intermission. Our camera crew had already practiced the moves several times with the dancers, and it paid off. We filmed on Canadian Thanksgiving Day. The theatrical union crew we had to hire was just waiting for us to go 1 minute over because they'd have received double golden time. After we got our main shot, we also filmed a curtain call for the end of the film, all within our 5-minute window.
You know, I've spent most of my life...
The cameras make so much noise in a close shot like this that the actors can't hear each other's lines. They had to practice beforehand in order to know when to speak and react.
What anyone ask for?
Bug spray.
As usual in Circle Vision, the dialogue was all replaced later.
Come on, Murray, admit it. You had a good time, eh?
We filmed these scenes in northern Ontario to capture fall colors as part of a story of hunters and a guide who've come in by float plane, a very common way to travel in this part of Canada. A pontoon raft allowed us to position the cameras close to the plane's takeoff point. We set up our helicopter platforms nearby so that we could mount the Circle Vision cameras underneath, then flew air-to-air with the float plane. The 2 aircraft fly at different cruising speeds, so it was a challenge to keep the plane in the shot. The only way to compose within the frame is to move the helicopter, but a video assist helped me guide the pilot.
In all walks of life.
Salut Marie. À lundi. Bonne fête de semaine.
Another tilt-down shot, this time in a large square in Montreal, to establish this story's main character as a city-dwelling businesswoman who likes to go into the countryside on weekends.
With a few friends.
We arranged this farmer in the foreground, but he couldn't hear our group of cyclists in the background. I had to signal him when to turn. This point of view shot going through small Quebec towns was from the roof of a small car that couldn't be seen by the cameras. The fall colors that we had been promised were late, so we'd collected bags of colorful leaves from elsewhere to scatter around. For this shot, I was curled around the base of the cameras with tires passing close to my head. Some leaves on the nearby trees and bushes were painted in bright colors with water-based streaks and tips. To match light and action on 2 consecutive circle vision shots requires a lot of hustle. It can take hours to break down and move the cameras from one setup to another. We used a cyclist in a yellow jersey to pass through our shot as a kind of visual continuity to help tie into the next story. Our young French lover sequence begins in an outdoor cafe that we could completely control, so everyone in the shot was an actor or an extra. The idea was to show how these 2 kids had lost track of time, so we used a transition that required a locked-off camera at the end of the dolly shot in order to match the images. It's not until the waiter asks, in the local Quebecois dialect, if they're finally ready to order some dinner that they realize just how late it is. Another tilt shot, this time to reveal we are in Quebec City's Old Town. The sequence took 5 days, shooting at sunset. This was the largest area we had under control, and during tourist season. On a recommendation during casting, I went to see a local French language play. I only stayed for the first act, thought the actor was fine, and he had the right attitude, so I said, hire him. It turned out the actor I was supposed to see was only in the second act. But it worked out. We rented a large crane to get our cameras onto the rooftop. A few fake chimneys were positioned close to camera during the dolly move. This cramped bedroom was real, but everything in the shot was positioned very carefully for the camera. To save space, there's no bed, just a headboard and pillows propped up into frame. The ballet poster was added to help tie the stories together. At the end of rooftop filming, we had enough footage left for one short scene at sunset. Then we had to remove our equipment by crane in the dark.
Through all the seasons,
This aerial was an outtake, borrowed from an earlier Circle Vision production, but hadn't been seen by audiences before.
Prepare to detonate on my command. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
Up in the Canadian Rockies, we staged an avalanche that was set off by park rangers. Everyone kept saying the sound was out of sync because I insisted on a realistic delay for its arrival at our position. Our cameraman, Bob Ennis, filmed a different avalanche using a single camera in a special housing. For a transition shot from winter to summer, we flew to a location in the Rockies to get the first part in very deep snow. We returned to the same position in the spring, hopefully to get a matching shot. It took 6 months to find out if the technique worked. As with all of our film's 12 stories, we used real people, most of whom had never acted before. The idea was that one needed to see many different portraits to understand and get a sense of Canada and Canadians. We found a locale for our helicopter rescue sequence and airlifted our equipment and teams to the mountaintop, requiring close coordination between rangers, air crew, and camera crew. Because it would be so easy for things to go wrong, our object was to safely capture as much of the operation as we could within the limited views of the camera. We staged the aftermath of the rescue at Lake Louise, the iconic tourist location. The scene was designed to reveal that this was a training exercise, not a real rescue. What seemed like a simple shot of a father teaching his son to fish from their local river turned out to be quite challenging. We had to use powerful boats against the current just to land our crew and equipment onto a spit of land. It required a lot of effort to make a smooth dolly track over the uneven surface. Disney's massive underwater housing unit was pressed into service in a Vancouver River locale many miles away. I was standing on top of the camera in the middle of a frigid stream. I dumped a bucket of live salmon in from a fishery, then had to quickly snag one with the fish net. For the second shot, we simply loaded a salmon into the father's net. These little shacks were filled with the most incredible smoked salmon. People of the Wet'suwet'en First Nation offered us samples that were pretty much the whole fish.
Passed on from generation to generation. For at the heart of our
We found an abandoned house outside of Saskatoon. We needed to see it as it was long ago, but also how it looked several years later.
Is Margaret bringing the grandchildren with her?
For filming the house interior, we needed to have 2 sets of furnishings to represent the 2 different eras, including a quick change of wallpaper.
I don't know why we can't all be together.
Our grip built a special dolly track that allowed us to descend the camera while moving in towards the grandmother, and then we could lock it in place.
Was in the old days.
During the transition, the house was reconfigured to how it looked when the main character was a young girl and was very close to her sister and family. We cast locally from a theatrical company to try to match the characters, old and young.
Get up, lady.
To buy a real Christmas tree.
Interiors like this are very difficult in circle vision because every light and cable has to be hidden from view. The ability to focus is limited, so everyone has to hit their marks accurately. We had help from locals in finding a period sleigh, but didn't have to do anything to make this church look appropriate for the time period. The props department made up multiple turkeys on a platter, just in case we dropped one. Framing a shot like this means the actors have to keep their positions to maintain focus and to avoid a nasty split between the screens.
Sister. Mother.
We filmed this scene first in the more modern furnishings so that we could then set up for the first interior and then go into the transition. You only want your art department to make a big change like that once.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you.
Outside, we used a tilt plate to visually connect the Prairie Christmas story to the one in space.
we look forward to the promise of tomorrow.
The Circle Vision camera wouldn't fit in Houston's Space Shuttle simulator. We used a single camera on a rotating plate to capture the 9 views, adding floating objects later. The Earth was created in a Cray supercomputer, the only way to create a shot like this in 1985. The satellite and other objects were models composited together with a starfield. We'd put black cloth outside the windows, but needed to add scientifically correct starfields later. Grabbing the satellite was planned as a key emotional high point for the intended audience of Canadians, since the successful arm has always elicited a well-deserved sense of pride. This was followed by the so-called curtain call of players, starting with the ballet sequence.
We have seen there is no one Canadian.
Each of the main characters from the 12 stories got their close-up in the finale.
Portraits of Canada.
Unlike all other Disney theme park films, Portraits of Canada had end credits. Our clients insisted on this because their film made in 1967 had credits as well. The crew and the film's participants weren't going to argue the point. But of course the credits were cut off when the film played for a while at Epcot Center. The score for Portraits of Canada was written by 2-time Oscar winner Leonard Rosenman and recorded by the Montreal Symphony Orchestra, their first movie score. This was our sound mixing setup on a stage at Disney Studios. The 9 film panels are transferred to digital video so we can stop and start the imagery in synchronization with the audio recorders. For a film less than 20 minutes long, it can take as much as 6 weeks to get all the dialogue, music, and sound effects balanced and assigned to the right speakers and screens. But it makes for a very involving and immersive Circle Vision experience. Thanks for listening.